Hello guys, this is your friend and we are back with a new fanfic. Which is what if Naruto rose beyond Hokage, becoming the god of wrath with Kushina, Minato, the femme Kyuubi and femme Haku's forbidden desire PSRT2. And if you enjoy this fanfic then please press the like button and subscribe to my channel for more fanfic like this. And now let's start the fanfic. It has been 3 days since the reveal of Kuromi being the Kyuubi no Yoko, at the same time as her being Naruto's mate, with him being the reincarnation of a god of wrath and of a son of the Sage of Six Paths. Everyone was surprised at Naruto, of all people being something so important, especially when they were finally told that Yonko means 4 emperors. The group who took Kushina's side, which were a good portion of the female shinobi force, and the clan heads with their clans, were all amazed at how much of an important figure Naruto became. The civilian council, Minato, and the advisors all didn't care about him, only that his prestige could be used, and when they are done with him, they would have him sealed away. Currently, Naruto can be seen training in the Uzumaki training grounds, working on controlling his strength and speed by wearing gravity seal, enhanced weights that spread the weight all over the body instead of just weighing down the limb. He currently was wearing the equivalent to 120 tons at 30 times Earth's gravity, and he was currently trying to get used to moving right now as he was kinda doing a walking crouch around the training ground and was breaking a heavy sweat as the farthest he'd gone was 100 tons at 25 times Earth's gravity. Basically how Goku walks whenever he uses a new gravity setting in the gravity room. Off to the side, watching Naruto were Kushina, Naruto, Kuromi, and Anko, who were all wearing blushes on their faces except Kuromi, who had a look of lust that matched Anko's. The reason being that Naruto was doing all of these exercises shirtless, so the 4 women could all clearly see his toned, rock-hard abs, chest, back, and arms as he moved. They watched as slowly moved around the grounds and were still surprised to see him moving at all with the amount of weight he has added to himself, which would have crushed any normal person from the amount of force needed to even move a few steps. The fact Naruto was moving so much while only sweating heavily was astounding to Kushina, Naruto, and Anko. When Naruto was at least able to stand up all the way, he began to do actual workouts like sit-ups, push-ups, and the like, until he was a little more accustomed. Then he would begin to practice his katas, and movement to increase his speed. As Naruto was doing his push-ups, Naruto decided to ask something that had been on her mind for a while. So, began Naruto, gaining the attention of the other women, how did you get out of the seal exactly? This got the attention of Kushina and Anko, who finally looked away from Naruto who had moved on to sit-ups, as they were interested in finding out how that happened as well. Kuromi glanced at them before returning to watching Naruto do his workouts before saying, I got out of the seal by mixing my chakra with his. This let me be out physically, but most of my power is still inside of him. Kuromi then shows a mark that looks like a fox surrounded by a ring of flaming chains. This mark is basically proof that while I am out here, my power is still locked and can only be regulated by Naruto. The trio nodded their heads when Kushina asked, how do you mix your chakra with his? Through physical contact, I was able to mix our chakras, which confused the seal just enough for me to create this body to be out here. The only thing I needed to do was leave a large portion of my power so that the seal would still think I'm there. Kuromi explained. Kushina and Naruto understood this and both nodded their heads. Anko however asked something that the previous 2 missed. So, what did you do for physical contact? This caused the grounds to be silent except for the sounds of Naruto counting his reps. Kushina and Naruto turned to Kuromi who had a light blush as she continued watching Naruto, trying to ignore the looks she was receiving. She glanced at them and sighed before turning to them, well, it wasn't a kiss or anything if that's what you 2 are thinking. She replied, while motioning to Kushina and Naruto who both went beet red at being caught thinking that was the case. Kuromi then turned back to Naruto and said, I marked him as my mate, which requires me to bite his neck when he was 10 years old. At hearing this, Naruto and Kushina both felt jealous because they realized something. Kurumi has spent more time teaching and being there for Naruto than either of them. Naruto didn't like this because she wanted her brother to herself and didn't like Kurumi coming and trying to steal him away from her. Kushina didn't like this because that would mean that Naruto has been alone with Kurumi for several years and had her there to teach him and help him than she has as his mother. Kurumi could tell what they were feeling and said, "You guys shouldn't be feeling like that, it's not your fault you couldn't be there for him." This got the mother-daughter duo to look in shock at what Kurumi said, expecting her to accuse them of being terrible family members. "He is here because he wants to be with you guys and spend time to get to know you and for you to do the same." The duo were wide-eyed and began thinking about this, and realized she was right. They then heard a loud thud and turned to see Naruto was panting heavily with a puddle of sweat around him. They checked the clock and were surprised that they had been talking for almost 2 hours and all that time Naruto had been training. Then they heard a loud rumbling noise and were wondering where it came from until they heard Naruto moaning childishly, "I'm hungry." Hearing the four women giggled at his antics, then Kushina said, "Go shower Naruto-kun, while I start lunch." "Okay Ka-san." Naruto relied before getting up and moving a little easier, which surprised the three kunoichi, not expecting Naruto to move as easily so quickly. Kurumi wasn't surprised by this as she had seen Naruto get used to heavy weights and high amounts of gravity quickly before. As Naruto was getting up, the four women suddenly saw a tattoo on his back. It was a black cross made of bones with a grinning face on it that had a white, crescent-shaped mustache on it. Kurumi knew what it was because she had seen Naruto's back before. The other three didn't however as they had never seen Naruto shirtless before. Ace's tattoo of Whitebeard's Jolly Roger but black instead of purple. Kushina however being the mother she is asked, "Naruto, when did you get a tattoo and what does it mean?" However, she began to get the feeling that she shouldn't have asked when Naruto suddenly froze and tensed up before he began to grip his fists so hard that they began bleeding from the palm. When Naruto turned around, the four women got terrified when they saw the look on his face was one of pure, unadulterated rage and the right half of his face was shadowed. This caused them to be even more scared when they saw his right eye began to shine pure white and forming behind. They saw what looked like a pitch-black demon that had glowing white eyes, a glowing red mouth that had razor-sharp teeth, claws for nails, and silver-gray markings all around its body. However, this didn't compare to the amount of killing intent he was releasing, as it was so much, that the entire village felt it, causing the Anbu and all of the clan heads to mobilize around the source to find Naruto was the cause. Asura's Berserker mode from Asura's Wrath is Naruto's shadow. Naruto saw the looks of fear on everyone, as well as them tending for a fight. He closed his eyes to begin calming down by taking deep breaths. As he calmed down, the image in the shadow began to fade away and Naruto began to relax his body, before he looked at them with dead eyes filled with sadness, regret, and hidden rage that caused all those looking to feel his pain. Naruto then replied and said, "I got it when I left the village a few years ago, when I met my pop because it was his mark. I still wear it to not only make him proud but also to remind myself of one of my greatest mistakes in not being able to keep him safe, but I promised him before his death, that I would not let it hold me back." With that, Naruto walked inside leaving everyone to think about what could have possibly happened to him when he left the village as well as confused on what he meant when he said, his pop. The Anbu then left except for Kat who was still there along with the female clan heads. The clan heads, Kat, and Kushina were all wondering what could have happened that would cause such a reaction from him. Meanwhile, Naruto and Kurumi were trying to figure out what had happened to him. Naruto, because she wanted to know what happened to Naruto and what she could to do help. Kurumi because Naruto has always told her everything and this was something that he hadn't told her, which saddened her greatly. With Naruto, Naruto was in the shower, going over what had just happened and lying in the drawer with his clothes was a scroll that held a certain fruit. "I can't believe it almost came out again." Naruto thought, I need to get more control so that it won't go berserk again and broke my promise. He then remembered what was in his possession and gripped his hand. I also need to figure out what to do with that fruit. Naruto was berating himself for almost releasing a piece of that power by mistake, and letting his emotions weaken his control. He couldn't let every reminder of his mistake cause him to go off the rails, especially when he swore to never let it hold him back and needed to figure out what to do with the fruit inside the scroll. He began to remember what led to his father's death, him swearing to never let it hold him back before he came back, and the first time he ever went berserk, and him taking possession of the fruit. Flashback: 2 weeks before Naruto was seen returning by Hinata. Naruto was crying as he was watched as his pop was dying after taking so much damage. He covered in slash marks from swords and was full of holes of different sizes, with the two worst being the two massive holes in the front of his torso. His white crescent shape was broken on the left side, blood leaking down from his mouth, head and all of the wounds. He was standing at his full height of 21 feet 10, shirtless, wearing blood-stained, light-colored pants tucked into his large black boots, a white captain's coat that bore the same symbol on Naruto's back and a black bandana on his head with a matching dark sash tied around his waist. This was Edward Newgate, also known as Whitebeard, one of the Yonko. Naruto was blaming himself for being so caught up fighting. He never noticed the traitor to his pop's family come up and begin to attack his pop. It wasn't until the announcement that his pa was dying that he realized what had happened. He was listening to his pop's last words when he then looked at Naruto and said, "Remember my son, you should never let your anger get the better of you because it is when you do, that you cause the worst damage to those around you and yourself. So, please, after this, let yourself live life to the fullest and try your best to not let it out of control so you can live without regrets and worries, and I want you to take my place among the Yonko, as well as my weapon that I will entrust to you." Naruto was crying tears as he couldn't believe that his pop was dying, and he wasn't there to help protect him. He couldn't believe that he had failed to keep him safe, and yet his pop still wanted him to take his place, as well as his weapon. As Naruto was thinking about this, everyone from his pop's crew, to every one of their allies began to leave, but he didn't move. He kept standing there with his eyes slowly widening before he began slowly get angry. Marco, who was retreating with the others, turned around, and saw Naruto just standing there not moving. Marco tried to get to his crewmate but was then grabbed and swept away with the others who were retreating to their ships. The Whitebeard crew and all their allies were already out at sea and hadn't realized they had left Naruto until Marco shouted, "Wait! We left Naruto behind." The entire Whitebeard crew and their allies suddenly turned to see Naruto still standing in the same spot with his head down surrounded by marine soldiers. They were about to turn around to go get him until Naruto's head snapped up to show he was filled with rage and his eyes were glowing completely white before he started screaming with pain, sadness, and rage in his voice. Then, a huge burst of red chaotic energy that began to go off in waves as he continued to shout, causing massive shockwaves to happen with electricity flowing everywhere. This caused an explosion of light that caused everyone to shield their eyes, and when the light died down along with the energy, they all saw standing in Naruto's place was a shiny, metallic-looking demon with glowing white eyes and a glowing mouth filled with fangs and claws. Behind him, looking connected to his shoulders, were 4 huge glowing yellow-orange arms with claws made of energy before he let out a roar of anguish and anger before everything flashed white. Flashback end. Naruto remembered waking up covered in bandages in the Mobi with a whitish-blue pair with swirls in the shapes of the letter S all over it on the stand next to the bed. While he was looking around, he saw his pop's Bisinto leaning on the wall in the room. He then heard the door open and saw Marco walk in, and he began to shout that Naruto was all right. The others then came rushing in exclaiming their joy at seeing him awake and alive. They all then informed him that after whatever happened, they all returned for him, only to find that the entire base had been destroyed with the only survivors being the Marine admirals who had already left when he transformed, and that all the Marine soldiers and Marshal D. Teach and his crew died as well. This led the group to finding two of their fruits had changed into the Gura Gura no Mi that was next to him, but the Yummy Yummy no Mi, they weren't sure what to do with it as they were afraid something would happen to it. Naruto then suggested that he take it with him inside a scroll that would never leave his side until he could find a proper owner. The others agreed and they brought the Yummy Yummy no Mi, which was a fruit that looked to be made of a lot of teardrop shaped pieces with swirl designs on them, and they watched him bring out two scrolls. They watched as he unrolled the one with the kanji for souvenirs on it, to reveal an intricate design of markings before he placed his hands on the scroll before in a puff of smoke he unsealed a pair of black-rimmed, maroon-tinted sunglasses, a pair of golden snake earrings, a snake-shaped gem necklace, a pair of red-rimmed glasses, 3 pieces of blue, hollowed-out steel that looked to be able to come together, a pair of red, ball-shaped earrings, a green furzuka with light green lining, a pink and purple bandana, a white cowboy hat, and finally a light green feather. Once done he asked for the fruit which he placed among the pile of items, then resealed everything. He then opened the other scroll and copied the designs before he then wrote a note and sealed it inside, before rolling up the scroll and titling it, Darkness, and rolling it up. Everyone was confused until he explained that it was a way misdirect thieves, which got looks of understanding from everyone. They all then informed him that he had been unconscious for 5 days, and during that time they had been sailing around and were currently resting on a nearby island before asking what he wanted them to do. He said that they should set sail towards his home and afterwards they would leave him there so that he may continue training and that Marco would be in charge until he returned. They crew obviously disagreed with this decision, but then they stopped when he told them that should he would be fine and that should they ever need him, to come back and send a message to Konoha, which is the village he was from. This got them to agree, and before long, they had been on their way back to his home, which took another 6 days of sailing. During which, Naruto or the Gura Gura no Mi, gaining his pop's powers, and began to lightly practice them, due to where he was. They eventually reached the elemental nations, where Naruto disembarked, but not before giving Marco a couple of envelopes, that held letters and pieces of his vice card, that he asked be sent to specific places or people. Marco agreed wholeheartedly, giving Naruto peace of mind before he began making his way to Konoha, which took another 3 days of walking, which was the most he could do because of his injuries and continuing to lightly practice his pop's powers. When he finally returned to Kurumi, who had stayed behind to keep watch of what happened in the village and with his Kaz-san and his Imouto, he was fret over by Kurumi upon seeing his bandages, before he managed to calm her down and tell her he was all right. Kurumi then told him that the village hadn't been up to much, and then she told him how his Kaz-san and Imouto had begun training heavily alongside several kunoichi, clan heads and their daughters, as well as their children's female friends, all so that they could bring him back home. This had surprised Naruto when he heard this, but then this lit a fire in himself to continue to get stronger and train harder, so that he wouldn't be left behind. Naruto shook himself out of his thoughts and finished his shower, before leaving his hair untied showing its true luster after the shower, putting on some maroon-colored sweatpants that closed at his ankles and a simple gray muscle shirt. He then walked out of the bathroom and smelled food and followed his nose, which led him to the kitchen where he saw his Kaz-san, Kurumi, Tsume, Makoto, Hitomi, Anko, Kurenai, and Yugao all cooking. Kurenai then turned and saw Naruto looking at all of them curiously with his head tilted, causing her to blush and eep when she saw his strong, powerful-looking arms. This got the attention of the rest of the women in the kitchen before they all began to blush as well, causing an awkward silence. Before Anko broke it by whistling and exclaiming, "Damn! You're providing us one hell of a view, you know." Naruto knew this was an attempt to tease him before he gave a smirk that Anko could say she was proud of and acted innocent before saying, "Really? You're okay with just this?" Naruto asked, innocently, getting Anko to blush at realizing that he had her in a corner with the rest of the women sending subtle glares at her for opening her mouth. "I would have figured you'd try and rip my shirt off to see these." Naruto continued gaining their attention again, When they saw him lift the front of his muscle shirt with his right hand, revealing his rock-hard abs while having a confident look, which got him the reaction he wanted of all the women turning beet red and soon beginning to pant slightly before he let go of his shirt and began laughing while walking away. This action got the women's blushes to deepen, realizing they had just been played but also out of arousal from seeing Naruto look so. They all then felt themselves and thanked their stars for planning ahead and bringing spare panties because his appeal was off the charts. Naruto was walking through the house when he heard the sound of training and looked outside to see his sister and all her female friends from class all training. He saw Naruto and Satsuki training in Kenjutsu, Kira and Hinata were helping Ino, Sakura and Yakumo with their physical abilities by helping them in taijutsu. Naruto saw no reason to interrupt them and sat down on the wood floor and began watching them, while mentally taking notes on any flaws he sees. He saw Naruto and Satsuki were doing well, but their stances had holes that he knew any experienced shinobi or swordsman could take advantage of and land a critical strike. However, he knew these holes weren't from lack of training and actually from lack of battle experience. He then turned his attention to the others and saw that Kira's style relied on speed and combos with her partner who was currently sitting down in the shade. He couldn't say much about her regular taijutsu style, due to her not working with her partner, but he could see that in simple one-on-one fights where her partner was injured or she was separated from him, she would be in trouble because she didn't have a second style to fall back on should those scenarios happen. He then saw Hinata and immediately realized that she was strong and being a Hyuga would really help due to her Byakugan, but she didn't really focus on attacking or seem very confident, which could be her downfall, but he understands that she is a kind spirit and has low self-confidence. He then watched Ino and Sakura and decided that they needed to get their stamina and endurance up as well as their strength and get a proper style because they are going more for brawler styles at the current time. Yakumo, he saw something was severely wrong when she looked about to collapse even though she wasn't as physically adept as the others, she should have at least been the same level as Sakura and Ino, maybe a little better. While he was looking at Yakumo, he didn't notice Kira stop and sniff the air, before turning to his direction and seeing him. She blushed before she shouted, "Hey, Naruto." This got the reaction of all the girls stopping what they were doing to see Naruto calmly sitting on the floor of the porch, waving at all of them while calmly smiling. The girls all blushed seeing him with his hair out of its ponytail, because it made him look more handsome in their opinion, as well as wearing a muscle shirt which showed off his arms very nicely. Hinata began to heavily blush, Sakura and Ino were blushing as well, with hearts in their eyes. Kira was blushing brightly and had drool coming out of her mouth, and Satsuki, Yakumo, and Naruto just had light blushes, with Satsuki and Yakumo trying to not let it be noticed by turning their heads. Naruto then asked, "What are you doing, Ni-san?" Naruto chuckled at their reactions before replying, "Well, I was walking around and then I saw all of you training and decided to sit and watch, so that I could offer some help." This got the girls' attention as they then asked how they did. "Well, you all are doing very well in your own rights," Naruto began getting them all to smile. "However, there are just a few things that I saw, which could be problematic for you guys in the future." This got the girls to be serious and listen to what he had to say. "Naruto and Satsuki, you both are amazing at Kenjutsu and your forms are amazing as well. However, there are a few holes in your stances and when you move, but that is just due to lack of battle experience, so you should be fine as you grow and fight," explained Naruto, getting the two to smile and nod in understanding. He then turned to Kira. "Kira, I didn't see much because you were focusing on helping these three with their taijutsu and physical training, which is great, and from what I saw, I have no doubt that you will be a great teacher in the future." This got Kira to blush at his confidence in her. "Now, one thing I do know about your clan is that you work with your ninkin to perform your attacks, which is your greatest strength but also your greatest weakness." This got Kira to look at him in surprise. Naruto then went on to explain, "You see, while you both can work great together, if Akamaru gets hurt, lost or separated from you, then you will have to fight by yourself, which, from what I know, you can't do because you don't have a second taijutsu style to fall back on. Kira then understood what he meant. If she ever lost Akamaru or he was hurt and she was on her own, then she would have to fight by herself. She looked at Naruto and nodded her head in understanding. Naruto then looked at Hinata. Hinata, you are strong already, but the thing is, you don't seem to want to go on the offensive or seem too confident in yourself, which could be hazardous to not only yourself but your teammates as well. Hinata looked down, saddened by this fact, until Naruto explained it. It's okay to be kind and to have a kind heart, but you also have to be confident because if not, you may doubt a decision and this could cause your team to fail a mission that could be critical or lead to them being hurt. Hinata understood what he meant and looked up at him and nodded her head with a small smile on her face. Naruto smiled and nodded as well, showing that he was happy she was taking it so well. He then turned to the last three. Now, you three, I understand aren't as physically fit as the others. This earned Naruto 3 embarrassed blushes and sheepish looks. Now, Ino and Sakura, you two are doing okay as you are. All you need to do is build up your stamina and endurance some more, and find a taijutsu style for yourselves. Ino and Sakura nodded before they agreed to get back to training once he was done talking. Finally, Naruto turned to Yakumo and raised an eyebrow at her in curiosity. Now, you confuse me a bit. This got everyone to be confused. Even if you're not as physically adept as everyone, you should at least be at their level. He pointed at Ino and Sakura, getting them to blush, if not, just slightly better, but you seem to be doing worse, like something is holding you back or is sealed. This got Yakumo to tense and pale, which was missed by no one. What's the matter? Yakumo looked around and saw her friends were looking at her with worry and Naruto was looking at her with concern and worry. Yakumo sighed before she spoke. You're right, it is because I have a deal on me that holds back my power. Why do you have it though? Asked Naruto, curious about why this is the case along with the other girls. It is because my power is dangerous. When I was younger, my power would lead me to blacking out, and when I woke up, I would find that I did something bad. Yakumo explained with a shaky voice, sounding very scared when she suddenly felt a hand on her shoulder and looked up to see Naruto smiling at her, getting her to relax and blush at how close he was to her. You don't have to worry about your power. I have a theory, and if it's correct, I may be able to fix your power and get rid of the seal afterwards. But, I will need you to trust me, okay? Asked Naruto. Yakumo thought about it for a second, before she looked up and nodded. Naruto nodded as well and sat down before asking Yakumo to sit as well. She sat in front of him and asked what he was going to do. Naruto explained that he was going to take the both of them into her mind so that they can fix everything. Naruto put his hands on Yakumo's head and was about to dive in to help. This was when Kurenai came out to gather all the girls for lunch, when she saw Naruto and Yakumo, and shouted, "Stop! Don't do it!" Getting the girls' attention and causing the adults inside to all come rushing out to see what was happening, but they were too late, as Naruto's and Yakumo's heads drooped down, showing they were unconscious, but Naruto's hands were still on her head. The adults began running over to separate the two, but when they were about to reach for them, a barrier of white energy formed around the two, preventing anyone from disrupting them. Kurenai then began to panic and shouted, "We have to stop him and get him out." "Why? What wrong with what he's doing? Whatever it is he's doing?" asked Kushina, beginning to worry about her son after just reuniting with him. Kurumi felt for Naruto through the seal and figured out what he was doing. It seems he is diving into her mind with her in order to help her fix a problem she is having with her powers, and it seems this barrier is his doing as well and is some sort of auto-defense when he is performing something and cannot move. Kurumi informed the others, getting everyone to become curious about the energy and relax, except for Kurenai, who was still panicking, which was not missed. "Is there a reason you're still panicking, Kurenai?" Kurumi asked with narrowed eyes, getting everyone to focus on Kurenai. Kurenai sighed before she began, "A couple years ago, I was Yakumo's sensei with her being my apprentice. This surprised everyone at finding out that Yakumo was originally Kurenai's apprentice. She was a prodigy when it came to genjutsu, as her genjutsu were so realistic and strong that only someone of equal power could break out of them, but she was born with a weak body. The crazy part was that she was actually still growing, but her abilities were derived entirely from her clan's Kekkei Genkei, and would continue to make her more powerful. Her abilities were so strong at one point, that if you were cut in the genjutsu, your brain actually thought you were cut in real life and your body would reflect that cut in real life. This got surprised looks from everyone there because they shocked that someone so young was so powerful. At one point, she used to use paintings to create her illusions, but they were still so powerful that I had to begin sealing away bits of her power at a time in order for her to get used to them. I thought I was doing the right thing, but it turned out to be the worst thing because eventually, all of the sealed power took on a consciousness of its own and began to call itself Ito, and it seemed to hold all this malice inside of itself. I can't describe it right, but the feeling of the one time I saw it and felt its presence because it took over her body, I thought I was in a living nightmare. At this point, everyone was beginning to worry about Naruto, wondering if he would be okay because from what they're hearing, this may be something very bad. However, it was at this time, they noticed the barrier begin cracking, before it completely shattered with a slight bang, and a bright light, causing everyone to shield their eyes. When the light died down, they saw Naruto and Yakumo still on the floor. The only differences were that Yakumo looked different, as in she filled out so that her previous low B cup turned into old D cup with legs to match, her original brown hair was now mixed with strands of amber, and finally, she was currently kissing Naruto, who looked surprised, with her arms around his neck, making sure that she thoroughly enjoyed it. All the women there began to look and feel extremely jealous, except for Kurumi, as she expected something like this to happen. The other girls were jealous and wished that they were in Yakumo's place, with the grown women being jealous that they didn't have a kiss from Naruto. After Yakumo broke the kiss, everyone saw a string of saliva still connecting the two, before Yakumo smiled greatly, showing so much more emotion than she has in years, shocking her friends, and Kurenai hugged Naruto, and began thanking him repeatedly, while her eyes began tearing up. While Yakumo was thanking Naruto, everyone was confused on what happened in Yakumo's mind to cause such a reaction. 5 minutes ago, inside Yakumo's mind, Naruto and Yakumo were diving through her mind, heading to the root of the problem. On their way down, they saw images of memories passing by. They ignored these and kept going, until they reached an area that was dark and gloomy, where instead of images of memories, they all looked like paintings of Kurenai suffering through different deaths and tortures. Yakumo was holding onto him from behind and was scared, and she ducked behind him even more when they heard a voice. "Who are you?" asked a voice that seemed to be shifting between two voices. Naruto looked forward and saw a monster that was dressed the same way as Yakumo, with a pink kimono that was over red mesh armor, violet baggy pants, orange sandals, and had her matching brown hair that was straight on one side and had a braid on the other with a clip in her hair that had two circular designs in it. The only difference was that the monster had brown skin, long ears that shot out to the sides, 4 fangs with the top 2 being extra long, purple crescent marks under the eyes, and purple eyes with a pure black pupil. This was Ito, the manifestation of Yakumo's powers that became conscious, and it looked angry. Naruto stood his ground with a fierce look of determination and replied, "My name is Naruto and I am a friend of Yakumo's who wanted to see what was wrong with her and help, and it appears that I have found the problem. This body is too weak for her to wield our power. So, I will take over and show those who look down on us," exclaimed Ito. Naruto just looked saddened by this and said, "But, can't you see that you're hurting Yakumo more by not working together? If you want to show everyone they were wrong, then work together so that no one will ever look down on you." Naruto then turned and looked at Yakumo, who was surprised to see that Naruto wasn't afraid of Ito. Naruto then added, "Both of you." Ito was beginning to calm down and asked, "But what if they still look down on us?" Naruto then gave a calm smile and said, "Then I will always be there to remind you both, that even if the world looks down on you too, I will always believe in you. Yakumo and Ito both were surprised by this. Before the area began to change from dark and gloomy to a wide open field of grass, with ponds, trees and a bright, blue sky filled with clouds. Also standing before Naruto was Yakumo, who looked different. She also looked healthier than she had before and happier as well. Yakumo opened her eyes to reveal that she still had one light brown eye, but the other had turned amber in color. When she laid her eyes on him, immediately jumped at him, wrapped her arms around his neck and gave him a kiss. Naruto was surprised by this turn of events, and then the world flashed in a bright white light, causing him to shut his eyes. When he opened his eyes, they were back in the real world, and Yakumo was still kissing him, which very much surprised him, before she broke it off and began hugging him while thanking him over and over. He then looked around and saw everyone was staring at him and Yakumo, which got him to blush in embarrassment at having everyone stare at them. He then put up a hand and said, "What's up everyone? What are you doing here?" Kurenai was the first to get out of her shock and asked, "What are we doing? What were you thinking? Do you have any idea how dangerous that was?" This got everyone else to snap out of it as well, and began to look at Naruto with expectant looks, as well as looks of jealousy at Yakumo getting to kiss him. Naruto was confused. "What are you talking about? All I did was help Yakumo-chan fix a problem with her power in her mind by talking to it. Did nobody think of doing that?" asked Naruto with a raised eyebrow. Kurenai began to blush and drop her head in embarrassment, admitting that she hadn't thought of that. Naruto just chuckled and got up, with a little difficulty due to Yakumo not wanting to let go, but he simply moved her to his back. Then he walked over to Kurenai, and lightly patted her back while smiling at her and said, "It's okay, I didn't expect you to think of doing that, especially when you had previously been her sensei but then grew scared. I understand that everyone grows scared, and when they do, they don't want to try anything related to the person or object. But I do know from what I saw that you tried your best." Kurenai simply nodded, while everyone began to smile at Naruto, not blaming Kurenai for not helping more. Naruto then added, "Besides, you have someone to talk to." Naruto then brought Yakumo out from behind him, after he finally got her to let go, and placed her in front of Kurenai. The two stared at each other for a few minutes without saying anything, before Yakumo decided to break the silence. "I'm sorry." This surprised Kurenai at Yakumo apologizing. "I should have done a better job at trying to control and understand my powers. Can you forgive me?" At this point, Yakumo was crying, thinking that Kurenai wasn't going to forgive her, but she was surprised when she felt a pair of arms wrap around her. She looked up to see Kurenai was the one holding her and was also crying, which surprised her. Kurenai then said, "You shouldn't apologize for my failure in being unable to help you. I should be the one apologizing for not trying harder to help you. So, can you forgive me, Yakumo?" Yakumo was still crying, but this time it was out of joy as she began smiling while hugging Kurenai back, and she said, "Yeah, I forgive you." Everyone began to smile at the scene before them. While this was going on, Naruto had moved to the back with Kurumi and began smiling as well at being able to help someone. Kurumi then reached over and grabbed his hand, gaining his attention, and she smiled at him before saying, "You did a good thing, you know that?" Naruto nodded and said, "Yeah, but I still don't know how to react to that kiss." Kurumi giggled, "Well, do you like her that way?" Naruto blushed a little and said, "Yeah, but what about you?" Kurumi just replied, "I'm fine with it, and luckily, because you're the last male of a clan, you will be placed under the CRA, so you can have multiple girls and not feel guilty about it." Naruto nodded, "Well, that's a load off my mind, but I don't think that will be possible at the current time, while the bastard is still Hokage," Naruto said with venom at mentioning Minato. Kurumi then frowned and realized that he was right, because while Minato was still Hokage, he could force Naruto to get married to anyone he chooses, and they would only care about his money and prestige as part of the Uzumaki clan. Kurumi then had a thought, "Well, what if you date her, but don't let anyone know except for me and those we can trust." At this, Kurumi motioned to all the women present before continuing, "Until a new Hokage is chosen." Naruto thought about it and decided that it was a good plan, and there didn't seem to be any issues of trust, so Naruto nodded, agreeing with the plan. He then cleared his throat, gaining everyone's attention, and began telling them the plan. All the women present agreed with it, with Yakumo also blushing brightly, because she could stay with Naruto and not feel bad. The others also felt that this was their chance to get together with Naruto as well. All they needed was the opportunity to do so. With that, everyone then went inside and ate lunch before they spent the day relaxing. Naruto, Yakumo, and Kurumi were all relaxing on couch, with Yakumo and Kurumi relaxing on either side of Naruto and laying their heads on his shoulders. The others felt jealous at not being in their place, but then told themselves they could wait, and when they got him, it would be worth it. Later, at night, it was now the middle of the night and everyone had gone to bed, with Kurumi and Naruto sharing a room, but they weren't sleeping like the rest, and were instead making out with Kurumi on top of Naruto. Kurumi was running her fingers through his hair while Naruto was running his hands up and down her body before resting them on her nice, firm. He gave it a squeeze, earning a moan from Kurumi, who hadn't broken the kiss yet, and when she did, there was a string of saliva still connecting the two, and Kurumi had a look of lust on her face. Naruto then asked, "What do I owe this turn of events to?" With a smirk, "Well, I thought about rewarding you for doing such a good job helping that girl out, and then I remembered that it's been 3 years since our last time together, that I couldn't help myself," Kurumi said with a matching smirk, while beginning to loosen her clothing. "So, what do you say? Do you want this sexy fox or what?" Naruto's response was to leap at her and tear off her kimono blouse and look her in the eyes with a wild look and said, "Oh, I really want this fox." Naruto began attacking Kurumi's neck with kisses, licks, and bites, getting Kurumi to moan out loud and getting the two to thank Kami that they put silencing seals up. Naruto then began to move down and attack her collar with little bites. All of this was leaving hickeys all over Kurumi's neck, and she was enjoying it because it let her feel like he was marking her again and again, and she was feeling very wet. Kurumi then began to moan even louder, get even more wet, when he began to kiss and on her left, while fondling the other one before he then switched. As he was doing this, she began to squirm from the buildup she was feeling in her lower regions. Then before she knew it coming, she came, and she came hard. As she was coming down from her orgasm, Naruto began to look at her with a predatory look and a smirk. "Did you just come from having your teased?" Kurumi covered her face and began to blush. She knew what he was up to. He had done it the first time they had been together, and she hated when he took control from her, but at the same time she loved it. With her blush still on her face, she nodded her head, getting Naruto to chuckle and say, "You do remember what your punishment was from the last time you came without me, right?" Kurumi uncovered her eyes but still covered the rest of her face with her hands and nodded. Naruto then gained an expectant look. "Well, get to it." Kurumi nodded and got up, before she took off her pants and revealed the black lace thong she had before she took that off and stood in front of him in her full glory, also revealing the large amount of love juices dripping down from in between her thighs. She turned around, got down on her hands and knees and looked over her shoulder at him, all with her blush still present. Please give this naughty fox her punishment, Naruto-sama," Kurumi said, while enticingly shaking her hips and getting Naruto harder than he ever was. Naruto began to undress himself, until he was also fully revealing his 12-inch that was 3 inches thick. Kurumi saw this and began to leak even more from her, as well as began shaking her hips more with a bright blush on her face. Naruto moved over behind her, and began to aim at her, before he slammed it all inside of her in one go and had entered her womb. Kurumi let out a loud, screaming moan, showing she had come again from him entering her. Naruto hadn't moved, and she knew why, because her punishment required that she move until he climaxed, then her punishment was over. The hard part, however, was that she had to slam him back inside completely, which always caused her to come, but she had to do it. So, Kurumi began to move forward until only the tip of his was still inside her before she slammed it back inside her, causing her to moan and come again. She kept this up for 30 minutes, until finally she felt Naruto's begin to twitch inside of her, and a few more thrusts later, he finally came inside of her, getting her to come again, before her legs and arms finally gave out. Kurumi's body was still shaking from all the pleasure she felt and all the times she came, until she felt her hips being lifted, and Naruto then re-entered inside of her before he began thrusting inside of her again, causing her to begin moaning again. And Naruto, wait, I am still coming down from before, Kurumi exclaimed, but Naruto ignored her pleas to slow down. But I still haven't come enough yet, Naruto replied, before he began thrusting even faster into Kurumi. Kurumi began moaning even more from the pleasure, as every time Naruto bottomed out, he would re-enter her womb, which was her weak spot. Naruto kept going for another 25 minutes before he came again inside of Kurumi. As they kept going, they began changing positions using doggy style, cowgirl, reverse cowgirl, missionary, full Nelson, Naruto bending Kurumi over the bed, pushing her against the wall and thrusting into her from behind and in front. 3 hours later, Naruto had just finished coming inside of Kurumi for the 8th time, with Kurumi looking 5 months pregnant. Kurumi thought they were done, until she moaned and screamed from pleasure and pain, when Naruto thrusted his inside her. And Naruto-kun, not there. That's I'll go crazy, Kurumi exclaimed, but Naruto simply replied, I know, I want you to go crazy. Finally, another 2 hours later, they were beginning to wind down, with Naruto, Kurumi and missionary, and kissing her, while Kurumi had her eyes rolled up and wrapped her arms around his neck and her leg around his waist. Naruto then broke the kiss and said, Kurumi, I'm gonna come. Yes, come inside me again, keep coming inside me until I'm pregnant with your child, Kurumi exclaimed with her tongue falling out of her mouth and her eyes rolling up with the pupils shrinking. Naruto then came inside Kurumi with a roar, and Kurumi gave a screaming moan before she passed out from the amount of pleasure she had received from her mate. Over. This is where those of you who skipped the may stop and continue reading. Naruto then fell to lay beside Kurumi, who had begun instinctively curling up into his side while wrapping her arms around him. Naruto looked at her with half-lidded eyes and smiled softly before wrapping his arms around her, getting Kurumi to smile in her sleep, before he then went to sleep. Time skip. 4 days later. It has been 4 days since Naruto began dating Yakumo after helping her, as well as since he slept with Kurumi for the first time in 3 years, and it was now time for the genin to receive their team assignments. It had been an interesting time during the past 4 days. The morning after Naruto and Kurumi had was an interesting time for the duo. First, Kurumi couldn't get out of bed because she had no feeling in her lower half, and so Naruto carried her to the shower, where they spent another hour together. After that, when everyone was together eating breakfast, they all noticed Kurumi had a glow about her. The younger girls all asked how she got her skin to glow so much, with Kurumi answering that she was using an all-natural cream. The girls bought it, but the older women all knew better and that this cream must have come from Naruto, as they all had experience in bed, even if it wasn't all good with good men. After that morning, everyone had been training with Naruto, focusing on their taijutsu and physical abilities, Kushina helping with kenjutsu and reaction times, Kurenai helping with genjutsu, and all of the grown women helping with ninjutsu because every person had different affinities. Kushina would help Naruto and Satsuki keep up their kenjutsu skills, and help the others learn how to face someone using kenjutsu against them. Kurenai helped Yakumo, Sakura, and Ino learn genjutsus while teaching the rest how to break out of them. Each woman also helped by teaching everyone jutsu for their affinities, like Sakura had an earth affinity, Hinata had a water affinity, Yakumo had wind and earth affinities, Kira had an earth affinity. The three that surprised everyone were Naruto, Satsuki, and Naruto. Satsuki had her clan's fire affinity as well as a strong lightning and water affinities, which surprised everyone at this because while the lightning was a possibility, the lightning would normally have been weak and the water would not have been possible. Naruto had water, wind, and lighting, which was expected as her mom had wind and water, with her dad having lightning, but it was still a surprise to see she had 3 affinities. The real surprise, however, was Naruto, as it was found that he had affinities for each element except for earth. Nobody expected this except for Kurumi, as she knew what his affinities were from living inside of him for so many years. After that, everyone continued training, with Naruto being the last teacher. Naruto would assist the girls with their flaws by training and sparring with them in taijutsu. For Naruto and Satsuki, he fought them in taijutsu, and boy was that an eye-opener for them. Before they had begun, Naruto told them to come at him as if he was an actual enemy or with the intent to kill because he would not take it easy on them. They were hesitant at first, but when Naruto made the first move by disappearing and then reappearing in front of them and launched them both across the grounds, which surprised all the women at how easily he had done so, they no longer hesitated and began to attack him full force in taijutsu. The two knew they were good at taijutsu, but when they began fighting Naruto seriously, they realized that was better than them. Why? Better, and this was a blow to their pride. They thought that they were the best in taijutsu among their class, but then Naruto came and annihilated them. However, he didn't let them wallow and used this to show them the flaws in their techniques, which brought their spirits up and made smile, happy that he was helping them, but then they began blushing when he would use his hands and touch their bodies, showing the flaws in their moves. All in all, they really enjoyed training with Naruto, fixed some of their flaws, and got better at taijutsu. Naruto did the same for Kira and Hinata, but with Kira, he taught her how to also slow down and calm down in order to focus better and pay attention to her surroundings in order to sense attacks from multiple directions. This involved him using shadow clones, which he was taught by Kushina, and placing them in multiple places at different distances with Kira in the middle, blindfolded, and the Naruto throwing plastic balls at her with enough strength that he left several bruises all over her body, until she finally began to calm down and was able to dodge and deflect every single one. Kira was proud that she was able to do it after 3 days of training, and felt extremely happy and blushed when Naruto told her that he was proud of her and to keep up the good work. With Hinata, Naruto helped her first begin building up her confidence some more in combat, then he had her begin to use her clan's taijutsu against him, but after a while, he had her stop when he noticed something about her style. She was confused and nervous on why he stopped, believing that he was going to call her weak and a failure, which he must have seen because he reassured her that there was nothing wrong with her. This got her to relax. She was very surprised when he instead asked what her elemental affinities were, and she replied water before asking why he wanted to know. Naruto explained that she looked to be uncomfortable with the way she was fighting and said they would need to edit her clan's technique in order to fit someone with her affinities and flexibility because her clan usually had earth affinities. This made where her clan's style of taijutsu was meant more for people with earth affinities as well as were more rigid, but because she had a water affinity and was more flexible, it was like her body was fighting itself in order to move how it was supposed to. Hinata nodded in understanding and asked him when they could fix it, with Naruto replying, they would begin as soon as she felt like it. Hinata had been grateful to Naruto helping her because she was now more confident during combat, and while she still didn't like hurting people, she would go on the offensive when needed. They had also finally changed her clan's taijutsu a bit so that it would better work for her, as she now felt more comfortable and was now able to feel better about herself during training and combat. As for Yakumo, Ino, and Sakura, they received the most help from Naruto in order to build up their endurance and stamina, as well as begin learning some forms of taijutsu from Naruto. Ino and Yakumo learned judo, as this allowed them to learn how to deflect, flip, and throw people and not use too much energy. They both also blushed for many hours as Naruto would teach them what to do by placing his hands on there and demonstrate how a throw would go, by lightly and softly turning, throwing, and flipping them so that they wouldn't get hurt. They both loved feeling Naruto's hands on their bodies, whether it was their arms, legs, hips, or torso, they loved feeling it. However, they still paid attention to each lesson he taught. After each lesson, Naruto would have them try and do what he just taught to him, to see if they got it, and they both would perform the moves and also loved being able to grab his strong muscular body each time. As for Sakura, he taught her Muay Thai, as he explained that this allowed her to make stronger attacks than she normally could due to using her knees and elbows mainly, while also allowing for fast strikes through making her limbs do a snapping motion which allowed for fast quick strikes. He also used his hands to fix her stances and gave her examples of how a move should go. Afterwards, they both had a spar using only Muay Thai, and Sakura proved to be a natural user thanks to her fit arms that she gained from training. Another interesting thing that happened was that Sakura's mom came one day looking for Sakura and met Naruto, and the meeting was quite interesting to say the least. Flashback. Mebuki's POV. Mebuki had been walking around the village looking for her daughter Sakura in order to tell her to come home as it was getting late. Mebuki was a beautiful woman with fair skin and shoulder-length blonde hair with a single bang falling down her face. She had green eyes and wore a white kippao dress that hugged her double F cup with 3 red circular designs on the bottom of her dress in the back. Underneath she wore pink 3/4 length pants and brown sandals. Unknown to most in the village, as well as her husband and daughter, Mebuki used to be a kunoichi and was a damn good one, until she had Sakura and retired. After an hour of walking, Mebuki remembered that her daughter would go train at Kushina's house, and so she went in that direction. When Mebuki had finally come to Kushina's house, Kushina greeted her and asked what she was doing here, with Mebuki replying that she had come for her daughter. Kushina replied that she was in the back training and took Mebuki to the training grounds, and when Mebuki saw her daughter sparring with Naruto, she was ready to just immediately grab Sakura and then inform her husband, even though she didn't want to. For you see, unknown to popular belief, Mebuki did not hate Naruto and his family or think of Naruto and his family as demons or demon whores, her husband did. She just didn't know them that well, and this caused her to be adamant about talking with them, but as she was about to call her daughter, she saw her daughter smiling a bright and warm smile that she had never seen on her daughter's face at home. After seeing this, she decided to wait and watch her daughter train with Naruto and not tell her husband. She had grown worried when her daughter was knocked to the floor, but she smiled when she saw Naruto help Sakura stand and then begin explaining what she did wrong with a smile while praising her for doing a good job. Mebuki was surprised at how much of a good teacher Naruto was, and at this time, she decided to make herself known. Sakura had a look of surprise and slight worry at seeing her mother, which kinda surprised Mebuki at her daughter's reaction at seeing her, but it was Naruto's expression that surprised her the most, as when he saw her, his face instantly went neutral and cold with only his eyes expressing his curiosity at seeing her. This surprised Mebuki very much, as she hadn't expected him to suddenly change expressions so quickly, but then she was broken from her thoughts when Sakura began stuttering at how she hadn't expected to see her, and what she was doing here with a fake smile. This hurt Mebuki because she hadn't realized how much she let her husband dictate their lives until now, or how unhappy her daughter was at home, because when she saw her daughter have a fake smile on her face, she instantly realized it was the same smile she gave them at home. Mebuki then agreed with herself that she liked the other smile she saw from her daughter that was warm, bright, happy. Mebuki told Sakura not to worry and that she was just coming to get her and inform her that it was late and time to go home. Sakura was scared to go home, and Mebuki saw this and said not to worry because she wouldn't say anything to her husband anymore, as well as to keep up the good work. Sakura was stunned at this before she gave her mom her real, bright smile and acknowledged her mom's words before agreeing. Mebuki smiled and then turned to Naruto, who had softened his expression a bit when he saw Sakura smiling again before he went back to completely neutral when seeing Mebuki turn to him. Mebuki then did something that greatly surprised him. She bowed and thanked him for helping her daughter with her training. Upon hearing this, Naruto asked Mebuki to raise her head, and when she did, she blushed at seeing his expression had softened and he was smiling at her before he said that there was no need to thank him as he just wanted to make sure she made it back to her friends and family alive after each mission. Mebuki smiled and thanked him regardless, before she explained to him and Kushina that she had never actually hated them, she just didn't know them well, and that it was her husband who hated them. This got Naruto to nod his head before he said that he already figured it was something like that, which earned him surprised looks from the three. When they asked how he knew, he explained that he didn't feel hatred or malice coming from Mebuki, just curiosity that was directed at him and Kushina, but was mainly directed at him. This surprised the group, and Kushina asked how he was able to tell what they were feeling, and Naruto explained that he could sense emotions and was able to tell which were negative, like hatred, neutral, like curiosity, and positive, like joy. Afterwards, Naruto then told Mebuki that if ever wanted to talk and get to know him, then all she had to do was ask. Mebuki nodded her head with a smile and said she would take him up on that offer. With that, Mebuki and Sakura left to go home, and while they were walking, Mebuki surprised Sakura when she could expect grandchildren, which got Sakura to blush, until Sakura gained a sly smile and asked Mebuki when she could expect siblings from her and Naruto. Mebuki sputtered in surprise at the sudden question with a bright blush, before she asked her daughter if it was noticeable that she was checking Naruto out, with Sakura shaking her head and replying no, but only she had caught it. Mebuki sighed before letting her daughter know that she had been planning to get a divorce with her husband because she just doesn't love him anymore. Sakura was surprised at first, until she began nodding her head, understanding that her mother and father may have been in love for a while, but then he eventually just became distant and cruel. Sakura told her mom that she would stand by her through the whole thing and that they could always go and ask Naruto and his family if they could live with them. Mebuki wasn't sure at first, but when Sakura told her that this would give them both the chance to get closer to Naruto and his family, as well as see Naruto more, Mebuki was sold and told Sakura that she would get the divorce soon. Flashback end. Normal POV. Now, it was time for the genin to receive their team assignments. Naruto was sitting in his seat, waiting for Iruka to come and give them their teams, while he was also talking to the rest of the group, where he learned some random bits of information, but some was interesting. Like Choji apparently had a cousin whose father was a Kumo nin and her mother was his aunt on his mother's side. Naruto also learned that while Choji, his parents and her mom all treated her nicely, the rest of the clan and village seemed to be mean to her. He asked what her name was and found that it was Chocho, and that she was actually part of their graduating class as well, and that she had been homeschooled so as to minimize the amount of teasing and bullying she received, but would be arriving today so that she would get her team assignments. Naruto nodded and asked Choji to let him know so that he could meet her and hopefully be friends with her, which got Choji to smile and nod his head, while telling Naruto that he would do so. Naruto then continued to listen and talk and learned that Shikamaru was the definition of lazy genius, as he was incredibly smart but just didn't like putting in effort. Naruto got to know that Shikamaru liked to lay down and watch clouds and play shogi, and that his clan used shadow techniques, which greatly interested Naruto. They began to talk about ways to use his clan's techniques, when Naruto suggested maybe using shadows that come from clouds to increase the shadow they can use. Shikamaru was very interested in this idea and said he would try it, and that they should hang out sometime, with Naruto agreeing. With Shino, Naruto just greeted him and told him of some bugs that he had encountered during the past few years, with Shino listening intently about these insects and looked at the pictures of some of them that Naruto had. As for Sasuke, give me your power and teach me your techniques. Dobi. Naruto just ignored him as he kept trying to demand that Naruto give him secrets and power, until Naruto had enough and knocked him out with a simple back fist while having a straight face. At this, the entire class went silent in surprise, and all of Sasuke's fangirls were about to begin raging on Naruto until Naruto turned to them with the same face, and stared at them. This made them feel like they were being stared at like they were nothing until they turned their heads down in fear. Naruto didn't like seeing this and stood up, which made the entire class watch, until he moved to the girls who still had their heads down and he said that he wasn't mad at them. This surprised the fangirls and then they looked up and blushed when they saw him smiling at them, before he then explained that he had earned and worked hard to get his strength and that Sasuke was just trying to demand it from him when he wasn't willing to work for it, so he knocked him out to shut him up. They all then understood where Naruto was coming from and all saw Sasuke was nothing but a spoiled brat who believes he should have everything. After they nodded their heads, showing they understood where he was coming from, while mentally realizing that Naruto was the better choice than Sasuke. Naruto must have sensed this as he then told them that they would go farther as kunoichi if they took this seriously, and they may also get the attention of guys that they like. This made all of the girls gain serious expressions before they nodded, promising to themselves that even if they didn't gain Naruto's affections, they would do their best as kunoichi in order to impress someone. Now, everyone was sitting in their seats while quietly talking to each other about random things, when suddenly the door opened and walking in was a girl with a slightly heavier build. She had red lipstick-covered lips, dark-colored skin, amber-colored eyes and brown hair, that was kept in two spiky ponytails with the rest kept back with a pink headband and her bangs covering her left eye. She was wearing a white kimono with a mesh armor t-shirt underneath that hugged her double G cup, her wide hips, mouth-watering thighs, and huge, firm-looking bubble butt. To finish, she had a yellow sash with a darker yellow ribbon, black arm warmers, and black shinobi long boots, with gray stud earrings in both her ears. For what I'm thinking, look up, Boruto Chocho, and look for the image with Sarada and Chocho walking with each other, sweating, wearing black sports bras and black yoga pants, with red towels in hand. That is the body type one I'm thinking of with slightly thinner lips. When she walked in, everyone stopped talking and watched as she went to the back away from everyone else, before she took out a bag of chips and began eating them while ignoring everyone, with everyone beginning to talk to each other again. Naruto didn't know who this was, but he could feel that she was sad and he wanted to help, when he felt Choji begin to tap his shoulder. Naruto turned to Choji to see what was up. That's her. That's my cousin, the one I was telling you about. Choji told Naruto. Naruto's eyes widened for a second before he smiled and nodded, before he stood up, and began moving towards her without her noticing, until he sat down next to her. She noticed someone sit next to her and glanced at them before blushing at seeing such a handsome boy sit next to her. She was still eating her chips while blushing and taking glances at him every now while thinking, oh my Kami. He is so handsome. And he sat next to me when there are so many seats available, and isn't making fun of me. I should say something before he begins to think I'm weird. She was broken from her thought when she heard him speak to her. Hello, how are you today? Naruto asked, gaining her attention with her looking like a deer in headlights due being caught off guard when he suddenly spoke to her when she was thinking of what to say. Fine, how are you doing? She replied, while inwardly cursing herself for stuttering. I'm doing well, especially after knocking out Sasuke over there. Naruto replied, while pointing to the knocked out Sasuke, who Naruto had written and drawn on his face. She looked closely and saw that on his forehead, it said, sorry ladies, I only take men with big packages. This caused her to begin giggling but covered her mouth to not laugh out loud, before she saw on his right cheek it said, all sizes welcome. While pointing at his mouth, she let go of her chips, which Naruto caught before they hit the ground, in order to cover her mouth with both hands, before she then focused on his left cheek. On his left cheek it said two words that caused her to start just laughing like crazy. On his cheek it said, bitch boy. And he had a mustache drawn on him and fake glasses, with stitch marks going over his right eye. All of this caused her to begin laughing, which caused Naruto to begin laughing with her at realizing that she saw his artwork. Their laughter gained the attention of everyone else, with the girls blushing at Naruto and how handsome he looked smiling, and they loved his laugh. The guys began to blush as well when they saw her smiling. After they were done laughing, she then asked, with tears in her eyes from laughing so much, "Who did that?" "I did, because he was getting on my nerves and I decided simply knocking him out wasn't enough," replied Naruto. "Well, thank you for that, I really needed something to laugh at." "Oh, my name's Chocho, by the way. Chocho Akamichi," the now named Chocho said while extending her hand to Naruto. Naruto smiled and said, "Well, nice to meet you, Chocho. My name is Naruto Uzumaki and I'm glad you enjoyed my artwork." Chocho giggled and said, "Yeah, I really enjoyed your artwork, especially since he was the main person who would bully me for having a parent who was from Kumo." Chocho finished with a frown. Naruto wrapped his arm around her shoulders and brought her into a one-armed hug, which surprised her and caused her to blush at feeling his strong, muscular body against hers. "Well, you don't have to worry about anyone else bullying you. Just let me know if someone does and I will take care of them myself," Naruto told her with a slight mischievous look on his face, that caused her to blush a little more. Chocho then smiled and said, "Sure thing. But you know I can take of myself, right?" she asked with a raised eyebrow after getting out from under his arm, albeit reluctantly, seeing as she really enjoyed how his arm wrapped around her felt. It was now Naruto's turn to raise his eyebrow at her. "I kinda figured you would be able to, but is that any reason for me to not be allowed to help a beautiful girl out when she needs it?" Naruto asked. Chocho blushed at being called beautiful before replying with a smile, "No, I suppose you're right about that." Naruto then smiled and exclaimed, "Good. And, since I protect my friends and precious people, that makes us friends." Chocho blushed even more hearing his words, "You want to be friends with me?" "Of course. Why else would I cheer you up?" Naruto asked while tilting his head, getting Chocho to mentally exclaim, "Kawaii." Before she could reply, Iruka walked in and told everyone to sit in a seat, and he was pleasantly surprised to see everyone listen to him without him having to resort to his big head no jutsu, and was greatly surprised to see everyone have this new sense of determination. Iruka began looking around to see everyone had their eyes on him, but when his sight landed on Sasuke, he froze for a second before he began laughing at the hilarious sight before him. When he finally calmed down, he asked someone to wake him up. Naruto raised his hand and volunteered before he raised voice a little and said, "Sasuke will never be stronger than his brother." This got the reaction of Sasuke's eyes snapping open before he began shouting about who said that and how he will make them eat those words. Iruka shook his head before saying, "Shut up, Sasuke, and go wash your face, you've got something right there," Iruka said, while pointing at his face. This caused everyone to begin laughing at Sasuke, who ran out of the room to the bathroom. Every then heard a roar of, "Damn IIITTT." That caused everyone to begin laughing even harder, with Naruto being the only one to simply smirk. 20 minutes later, Sasuke was back in his seat and the class was beginning to continue. Iruka then gave the usual speech of how proud he is of them and to keep growing stronger to protect Konoha. Afterwards, Iruka began to call out the teams, skipping teams 1 to 6, and Team 7 will be made of Sasuke Uchiha, Sakura Haruno, and Shikamaru Nara, and your sensei will be Kakashi Hatake. Team 8 will be Kira Inuzuka, Hinata Hyuga, and Shino Aburame, and your sensei will be Kurenai Yuhi. Team 9 is still in rotation. Team 10 will be Ino Yamanaka, Choji Akamichi, and Yakumo Kurama, and your sensei will be Asuma Sarutobi. And finally, Team 11 will Naruto Uzumaki, Satsuki Uchiha, Chocho Akamichi, and Naruto Uzumaki, and your sensei will be Kushina Uzumaki, with assistant sensei being Anko Mitarashi. Everyone was astonished at the final team as they weren't expecting this turnout for teams, especially the final team. However, not everyone was happy with this. Why did they get 2 senseis while I'm stuck with these 2? I should be the one to receive 2 senseis. I am an Uchiha after all, an elite. Sasuke shouted, angered by how a couple of nobodies got two senseis when he was still got one that he has to share. Iruka had enough of Sasuke's attitude and said, "Sasuke Uchiha. You will respect the decision that has been made, or you can drop out completely and not have to worry about sharing a sensei because you won't have one." Sasuke then simply sat down and shut up, still completely upset at being stuck on a team with, in his mind, useless nobodies. Meanwhile, while the genin were receiving their team assignments, there was a big commotion coming from the village. The cause was a group of 4 beautiful women that had been seen entering the village and entered the Hokage tower, who were all, except for one, wearing revealing bikinis made out of different animal skins with white coat around their shoulders that had bright yellow epaulets on the shoulders with black boots. One of them was wearing a brown revealing bikini, she had a quiver of arrows at her hip, and had a green and black striped snake around her waist. She had short blonde hair, dark brown eyes, and a curvaceous figure, as seen by her long legs, mouth-watering thighs, double E-cup, and thin waist. Her name was Marguerite and she was one of 3 bodyguards. The second lady was tall and had a green bikini top with white irregular patterns, and green panties with orange flaps circling her hips. She also had a white coat with bright yellow epaulets and brown boots. She had green wavy hair, sea green eyes, a wide head, and a wavy, forked tongue that stuck out of her mouth. She also had a curvaceous body as seen by her double I-cup, wide hips, large bubble butt, and succulent thighs. Her name was Boa Sandersonia and she was another of the 3 bodyguards. The third lady was also tall and she wore a purple bikini with floral designs on the top, a pink flower necklace and brown boots along with a matching white coat with epaulets. She had long, wavy orange hair with the top of her hair styled to look like a Valkyrie's helmet. She had a slightly plump body with double H-cup, wide hips, a large, and thighs. Her name was Boa Marigold, the last of the 3 guards, and in her hands was a large weapon with a long black pole, and a curved blade with an extra curved blade on the back of it. The last lady was the most beautiful, as seen with her long, straight black hair, black eyes, and curvaceous figure as seen by her J-cup, long legs, thick thighs, wide hips, and firm. She was also wearing a matching white coat, along with a revealing red blouse that revealed much of her cleavage, a loose, red sarong that had pink and green floral designs that exposed her legs, and black high heels. Slithering next to her was a large white snake with large pink spots, a horned skull on its head with blue hair jutting out from the back of the skull. This was Boa, one of the Shichibukai, older sister to Sandersonia, and Marigold, and next to her was her snake, Salome. Currently, they stood in front of the one-armed Minato, who was also slightly blushing at the sight of the women's choice of clothing, as well as Boa's beauty. He then cleared his throat and mostly regained his composure, as seen by the slight blush still on his cheeks, before he asked, "Hello, who are you beautiful ladies?" Boa was the one who answered, "My name is Boa, these are my sisters Sandersonia and Marigold who are acting as my bodyguards along with Marguerite." Minato nodded before asking, smiling, "And what may I do for today?" Sandersonia was the one who replied, "We came here today because we have information that they originated from this village and have recently come back." Minato nodded before asking, "All right, and who is it that you are looking for?" Marguerite was the one answered this time, "We are looking for Naruto-sama." She didn't notice the look of disdain that Minato got on his face for a second, but the other 3 did. "He told us that if we ever needed anything from him then to come here and look for a village called Konoha." Minato now had a neutral look and asked, "And what is it that you need of him?" Boa, who was blushing, was the one who answered, and it was not what Minato was expecting, "We came to have him marry with us." At this, the other 3 began blushing as well. The entire room went silent, before the village heard a shout of, "Whaattt.